I see that we are thankfully compounding our audience. This is wonderful.
Oh, I see some new faces too. Hello.
Hello, hello, everyone. We'll get started in just 1 minute.
Morning, everyone.
And Kit and Bree, I'm gonna make you co-hosts.
Okay.
All right. Emily, what do you think? Are we about ready to talk a little bit about our next cohort?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we are. Okay. Let's go ahead and see if I can kind of get us started here. My name is Adam Plisick for those that I have not met. It's good to see that we are recording. That's always a nice way to start our adventure. And I'm going to go ahead and see if I can have my next set of slides come up. Can everyone see this? I see an Emily thumbs up. Okay, wonderful. It's great to see everybody here today. I'm joined by my partner in shame, Kit Muller, here on the line. Kit, you want to wave and say hello real quick?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here.
All right, Kit will be hounding you in the chat and letting you know if you have any questions and throwing tomatoes at me if I say anything that's silly and everything in between. So we're going to go ahead and follow along our adventure. For those that I haven't met, the kind of quick background about myself is I'm Adam Plisick. My day job is working at a company called skillbuilder.io that Kit and I founded out of some research that I had done for almost 5 years at Carnegie Mellon, where I've been a professor for more than a decade, largely teaching everything from cloud computing to lovingly what I call today Jedi mind tricks, which is ethical persuasion and influence. Outside of academia, I have been an entrepreneur for the better part of 20 years. I've largely worked on venture-backed, which is like high-tech, high-growth, excuse me, companies along the journey. And even around town in Pittsburgh had a nonprofit called City Lab and a community center, excuse me, called The Shop in Homeland, which is in the east end of Pittsburgh, where just recently I transitioned to a really amazing founder named Rafiq Cromwell, who will take on the next chapter of The Shop called Privé Creative. So hopefully everybody here today thinks they are going to improve development. Is that the right place? So sorry, everybody. It seems like I'm catching the fall to or winter to spring transition. This cohort is really about the dirtiest word in nonprofit, which is sales. The reality, though, is that 100% of nonprofits, when you talk to them and you ask them in their heart of hearts what's really going wrong or what's really going right, is that it's not delivering the impact. You know, more often than not, they have incredible people that physically just don't have enough time or money to do the work. And that loosely roots from this idea of development. So development, no matter how we frame the business of nonprofit, impact can only be maximized with maximum resources. And there's rarely a way to achieve something bigger than what you've already achieved with the same people without introducing something new. Now, that something new could be mission or purpose, right? So it could be more impactful if you get more specialized. It could be around the time or geography you serve, right? It can span both the hours and the volume of days or space. And it can, of course, expand based on efficiently delivering that very thing, which is the principle of using technology like an AI construct to do things more efficiently, or ultimately to sort of upskill, or as we jokingly say, upskilly, right, all of our teammates to be able to ask for money, time, and resources in a more effective way. So today is a little bit about the preview about how we're going to do that. And it starts from a fundamental understanding that there are basically two types of persuasion and influence techniques. The first bucket is what you might call consultative. If you've heard like that nerd word Socratic, it just means, you know, question kind of oriented in nature, kind of through continuous discovery. A lot of the way we've been told to persuade in our past is by asking people questions. In fact, if you go on anywhere on the internet, as if you can't find your opinion anywhere about everything, you can definitely find it that asking a bunch of questions is a good idea. And in some ways, it has been historically, right? We can't come in cold. We have to be open-minded. We have to be curious. We have to be empathetic. But as it turns out, the idea of asking a potential donor, whether that's a big dollar donor or an institutional funder or small dollar donors, that questions exhaust people. And if you've ever been a caregiver, whether that's been a parent or a caregiver up or down or a teacher or anybody who's in a position to ultimately manage against like large groups of people, right? It's really, really hard to build consensus over time with the more people you get into the mix. So consultative selling starts out really great. It's like, hey, are you looking to support, the housing crisis? Yes. Does that align with your for-profit company's mission? Yes. Do you have available dollars that give me? Yes. But in the process of doing all that Socratic question and answering, you find yourself over-educating the person you're talking to and expanding their field of choice. You also are involving a whole lot more people as you do a bunch of interviews and discovery and consensus building that can say no, but can't actually say yes. And so if your goal is to accelerate a decision to fund you in a medium or major way, then consultative selling, despite all of its intuitive and kind of creature comforts of not feeling like you're really expressing a vulnerability, can actually work against you. And the scholarship largely plays out on this in sort of all the nerd world that I live in at CMU. And it illuminated a different type of selling or persuasion and influence, which is called challenge or provocative based methods of communication. And all that really means, for all the kind of buzzy sounding words in that, is that you bring a hypothesis to someone and you ask them to accept or reject that hypothesis. And so what this cohort is about, among other things, is building up the confidence to ask for stuff. It's about understanding how to process rejection and guilt and shame and insecurity when you're doing that, if that's not a natural skill set that you have. And it's to acknowledge the ways that operating with intention, like a salesperson does in the for-profit sector, in the nonprofit sector, can lead for the exact same accelerated decision-making and benefits that a for-profit salesperson would get, but for doing good. And, a big part of this and a big part of this cohort is like shaking off that like icky, cringy feeling that you sometimes get when you got to ask for things. And being comfortable enough that if someone says yes or no, that's like an equal response to move forward. And the origin of that all starts with the premise of understanding the difference of someone who's in a buyer mindset versus an investor mindset, which is the first slide we have here. Now, all of these exercises will include a little bit of supplementary video, some hands-on collaborative exercises, some asynchronous work to go on and try these on donors or development directors or staff or partners, and then come back and share, just like the other cohorts that we've already talked about today, human-centered design, and the one we're going to talk about next, which is responsible and ethical AI in terms of persuasion and influence for nonprofit and social impact. So if you just think about intuitively, what is the difference between a buyer, meaning someone who could donate to you, but is sort of kind of holding their money in a budget and could donate kind of anywhere that's opportunistic, and an investor mindset who's really willing to advocate? Does anybody want to come off mute and kind of share the way they've kind of felt that in their day-to-day or their journey? Just the difference between someone who could and would potentially participate or donate versus someone who's like really screaming from the rooftops that they need to be on the plan. Anyone to get brave and sort of warm up that voice box? This would be a good step in the sales-oriented development director cohort. Okay, so it's the mute button. It looks like a microphone. All right, Shannon, you look like you're paying attention, but don't want to hit your mute button. Tell me, how do you know when someone is really like on the plan? Like they're a raving fan, they're really an advocate. How do you sense that?
I think just in like your relationships with them, what they tell you or how they interact with your agency, organization, group, whether it be a donor, not a donator. I don't know what's wrong with my brain. A donor or a volunteer or something.
Okay. So I hear the enthusiasm and the advocacy and the passion. Anybody else want to weigh in? Douglas, Gary, Rachel, Karen. Anybody else want to come in and say like, hey, how do you know someone really is on your plan? So Shannon kind of laid us up with the kind of more observable moments, right? Enthusiasm, frequency of donation, right? Those are good mechanics. What else do they do though if they're really an advocate?
I think it's when they talk to other people about you, they
Exactly.
share information.
Couldn't say it any better, Karen. That's exactly right. They are that raving fan. They are that advocate. They go out and recruit other forms of resources and investment. So in theory, right, we need a mechanism as part of our journey together in this cohort to get everyone who's in that laissez-faire kind of do nothing attitude into the buyer mindset, but then the buyer mindset into the investor mindset. And that's an easy thing to say out loud, and it sounds really intuitive, but we are going to provide really specific tools and tactics that are organizationally aligned. So this is one of the many exercises we would do together called the Me+3. Again, all of this comes with a companion class and set of videos and text and commentaries and quizzes and examples that can be self-study in the journey, because everyone here is probably being polite on mute, but we all know that someone who talks as fast as me and uses eccentric sentence patterns could probably use a slow motion button, or at least a pause from time to time. So we're including all of that, with it. But one of the exercises we're going to talk about of the many is something called the me plus 3. And the me, as you would hear in the asynchronous videos or we'd reinforce during our live presentations, is all about the ability to demonstrate, not claim confidence, without becoming arrogant or expressing narcissism or hubris. And then from that point, we're going to attack and interrogate 3 major categories of triggers in a positive way to move somebody from a buyer to an investor mindset. And sometimes that's going to be context that you get around industry, right? Or vertical or space. Sometimes it's going to be about how relatable you can be to the operator, meaning the person on the other end, or how much you can demonstrate executional ability in your organization. And we're going to talk about ways to show that, how to audit it, and ultimately how to prioritize the least number of tactics, because the 3 is about picking the 3 of the 15 tactics that you're going to see as omnipresent across your website, your landing pages, your annual reports, your 990s, like whatever it is. Anytime that you demonstrate anything, right, that is meant to express value, you're going to have a lens with intention about how to do that. So if we move on, we're going to also spend a lot of time of the many lessons on the psychology of activating a donor's biology. So as it turns out, what you say in a rational, evidence-based way is only as good as they are sort of in the space to hear it. And there's a lot of ways to kind of optimize for this, but one of the sort of most foundational ways is to understand the archetype or the shape of the person that you are talking to. Now, when we use concepts like archetypes, as you can read in my bullet points here, they're not absolutes, right? They're guides to move you closer to understanding how to recognize a reward system based on the digital or physical environment, the words that are being said, the rapport or the research you've done leading up to it, and then act accordingly. Now, we're going to focus mostly on our cohorts about these kind of foundational archetypes. So people that have a number cruncher, a captain, and a visionary or a feeler reward system. We're also going to focus on some of the emerging archetypes we see, something called a savant, pioneer, activist, and chaperone. These all represent a MISI, or mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive framework to try to optimize for you so that when you are on a call or an annual update or you're heading into a meeting, that you have a mechanism to prepare for how your content needs to land in order to ultimately create the most urgency in someone making a decision, which is different than validating the importance of your problem, your mission, or your cause, which is what consultative selling does really, really well. But it doesn't create always a ton of urgency, because when you are waiting and being patient for someone to express consensus, right, you're by definition waiting in turn for lots of people to express consensus, which means they're not saying, oh yeah, that was the door opener issue. That's the thing we need to act on. And we're going to also show you, right, and give you literal printouts and tools that you can have on your desk to identify and circle, because the first kind of milestone of the Jedi Mind Tricks and development cohort is actually being able to get into the right quadrant, just the right corner of the reward system of the person you're listening to. And that's to avoid 2 really important and big mistakes. 1, you never want to project your reward system onto somebody else, unless it happens to be, lucky enough, the same one. So we need to acknowledge our reward system to know what we are projecting, so we understand if we are causing the problem or our content is causing the problem. And then the second thing is we need to learn how to not average all of the reward systems at once, right? We can't sell a visionary person in the same way that we sell a really analytical number cruncher. It just doesn't work. And if you do 50% number cruncher and 50% visionary, it's equally bad for both of them. It's not kind of good for both of them. And so we're going to talk about those principles. Any questions or reactions so far from the chat, or anything that we want to come along together?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize, so kind of backing up a little bit further, because I know there were some new folks to join this call. The purpose of this cohort is kind of like development director cohort that the Forbes Funds has offered in the past, augmented by AI to make it more efficient and more comfortable, especially as Adam stated. Sometimes those are difficult conversations to have, especially for folks in the nonprofit space who want to spend 100% of their time doing the work that they're passionate about and why they founded or work for the nonprofit in the first place. And the AI can take on some of those admin development pieces that are just part of the way that the sector operates. And so this is pretty much a master class in figuring out, again, where you can become more effective and efficient as a development professional for your organization at any level, from board to like newest hire, all the way to AI picking out where it can augment those pieces. And so I just wanted to reiterate that, because I know I've been sending a lot of emails, but just in terms of like why we're gathering today, and providing a little bit of context for all that Adam is talking about, like this is a new space for me with GPNP. My biggest sale is GPNP membership, right? And so figuring out ways that we can apply this with Skilly as we're trading it has been huge for me.
Yeah, well said, Emily. Any other questions or reactions, or should I go ahead and flip through a couple more examples of kind of what we're going to do? All right. So we're going to go through in this cohort, we're going to do different kind of comparative tools. We're going to give you resources like you see on your screen about how to do real-time or near-time guessing and estimating about who reward systems are. We're going to talk about how you use this internally to align your teams, as well as externally to attract time, money, or resources in whatever form your nonprofit or social impact org wants to achieve. And then we're going to get into specific archetypes, right? We're going to talk about the reward systems of a number cruncher and what they really need from you, and then give you tactical suggestions with examples, org level specific, about how you drive, let's say, the number cruncher into the investor mindset versus like putting them into the buyer mindset. And we're going to talk about the relationships of some archetypes to another, because we know that a lot of times that visionary is sitting in the same room as that bean counter is along the journey, just to balance out the culture of the organization. And so we'll do that for visionaries versus number crunchers. We'll come together, and then as an example of just one exercise, we'll actually pull up one of the cohort members, let's say big brag slide or annual report opener or executive summary. And we'll ask ourselves, how would that speak to a corporate executive that's a number cruncher that can dictate, let's say, foundation level giving, and compare that to how a young professional might participate in more of a visionary mindset based on how they would ultimately donate. So it's just a couple of ways to figuring out, kind of where we are starting and ultimately where are we bringing it together. Yeah. And so Fazza had mentioned something really important here, which is like, hey, how do we fundamentally bring the balance together? And the way that we fundamentally do that is we talk about the fact that if I go back a couple of slides, this is actually an intentional kind of symmetry that we are putting in here. So basically a captain, which is just to sort of shortcut a little bit to their reward system, is really about velocity and momentum and quick wins and feeling like they're always making progress, versus a feeler, which is a bit more of an architect of people and emotive and connected to kind of the slow motion version of the humanity in someone as they design their system and their org, typically pair really nicely together. So it's really rare to have, if all four executives are in the room, she, he, or they are all visionaries. Or it's really rare that they're all number crunchers. And so oftentimes it's at least companion pairings, if not complementary pairings of these reward systems. And a big part of the cohort is, how do you build a meeting when the boss is a visionary, but the number two is a number cruncher? Or the boss is a feeler and the number two is a captain? How does that look and how does that work? Does that make sense, Haza?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense.
Appreciate you, Peach. Okay, so the idea is we want to balance these dynamics out. And to Emily's point, we're going to use some really interesting methods of aligning on questions and answers to organize around this, but go the extra mile in labeling those answers for being intentional for a number cruncher, or intentional for a visionary. Or intentional for big dollar, small dollar. And we're going to use some of this AI assisted work, as Emily mentioned, called Skilly, right, to help us crowdsource and complement the right testimonials, expert advice, and answers to motivate everybody into this investor headspace and to keep them there. So that's a little bit about what we are going to pull together on our fronts. That's where I wanted to kind of push through today. And I wanted to leave some comments and some space available for everybody to ask or to challenge or to clarify about, hey, does this make sense? Do you have any other questions? How will this come together? Just to kind of pick up a couple of FAQs, no pun intended, from the last one. This is very, very, very much organized around groups of people from your organization. That can include a couple people from your staff. It could even include someone who's very representative of who you serve. Or it could be one of your funders. So all of those things are healthy combinations, right? If you have somebody who is okay with seeing how the sausage gets made at your nonprofit and knows where all the bodies are buried, and you can bring them in, right? It's a wonderful person to have in the room to actually design these kinds of answers and go through this with you, and they would benefit as well. Same thing for more junior people, or maybe you have someone who's a volunteer, but they're willing to make cold calls or show up. Equally good. Any other questions or reactions from the team before we turn it over to Emily? Oh, please, Claire, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually have a question. For someone who is outreach for my nonprofit, so my job is building relationships, and this course is this is the people that you would be working with. These are the different archetypes, which is good, but do you think it's a new approach, which I think would be helpful, but do you think it overcomplicates the building of connections and relationships? Because that's something I never struggled with, but I feel like this would bring me to the next level, of course.
Right.
But do you think I think connection is very simple. Does it overcomplicate in your brain? Like, I need to understand how this person is to relate to them as someone who like relates to people. Does it take away the genuinity of like building connections, do you think?
Well, I think that's a heavy question for a simple answer, but
That's fair.
what I would offer is two things. One, you never maximize the potential of your relationship until you honor the fullest potential of someone else's reward system. And if your job is to serve as opposed to be peers, then this is an unfair advantage for an impact organization to maximize impact, not two people to like each other the maximum amount. And
That's fair.
so we are teaching core skills to extract resources from large corporate institutions or people that have expressed an interest to do that. We are not maximizing our empathetic connection in the population we serve.
That's fair.
And so this is probably accidentally the largest point to be made in nonprofit about why we never have turned into salespeople, because you're asked 95% of the time to be that incredible universal adapter to the worst versions of people's life, day, stages, styles. And then you're asked to kind of pull that all together and kind of make it really easy to consume and not messy at all to corporate people. And those are equally important, but very different skill sets. And the first one you mentioned is what makes you a good human. The one I'm doing is what makes you a good development director. And they are related, but they are additive to each other in a big way. Does that make sense there?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Other reactions or questions? That was an excellent question, Claire. Thanks again. Okay. So, Emily, I know we have another cohort coming up in 6 minutes. We want to go ahead and kind of help everybody understand if they wanted to activate on this cohort or the previous one or the next one. What does all that look like?
Yeah, so I can share the link in the chat, and I'm getting my little 5-minute warning for the next session. I can share the link in the chat to register, but so the purpose of these info sessions is kind of like a teaser look into the differentiation between the 3 cohorts. I know we've sent out a ton of information over the last couple of weeks about right sizing, and I did see a couple of personal messages around, what type of curriculum does that include? What educational components are going to be part of each of these? And so I think the best thing to do is, one, I'm going to share the link again to that document or that web page that goes through a little bit more background. But the purpose of the cohorts really is to give you the skills in a peer-to-peer learning model where you can go back and apply these to your organizations as different ways of working. So it's educational, but it's more action-oriented. A good kind of bit of information that I tend to steal from Adam is that Mad Labs is a think do tank. So like, yes, it's really great to ideate about these things, but you also have to employ them to your organizations if they're going to be effective. So that's where this cohort is, kind of like the deeper way to do that, why we want more than one person involved from your organization. And so each of the cohorts is going to look a little different in terms of timing. The ideal commitment of time is like 1 to 2 hours a week between in-person time with Adam and Kit and myself, but also some asynchronous work that you can do on your own, thinking through prompts to questions, identifying, what are the 20 most common things that clients ask you or that funders ask you or that partners ask you, and crafting, your ideal response to that, and then kind of supercharging that in the next session with, feedback from Adam. And so it's very iterative, week to week, it all builds on itself. And it's self-paced in addition to the time that we'll have together. So depending on who does register and commit to, being part of the cohort, it's going to look a little bit different. Adam, do you have anything to add to that while I'm
No.
getting this link up?
No, I'm actually gonna roll because I got to get on to my next cohort here. But I just want to say thank you to everybody who was in the mix, and thank you for coming through. And please don't be afraid to follow up with questions or ideas to bring this together. And hopefully, I'll see you in a couple minutes on my next cohort. See you, everybody.
Thanks, Adam. I just put the link in the chat for everyone. And then if you want the link to the next Zoom session, let me grab that too. So you can get access to register for the next Skilly focused info session. Thanks everyone. If anyone has any questions, wants to stay on, I can be here for another couple minutes. And then I'll jump over to the Skilly one. See you there, Kit. And Gary, I was responding to your question.